A critique of Game B is that it's too intangible, too much talk, not enough action. And so, you and I have had an email conversation over the last few days talking a little bit about how to describe the phasings of Game A and what some of the subcomponents might be. And I've kind of taken that a little further. And I'm going to
Game B.
Game B, people. Right. If I'm saying something about the future, it's Game B, even if Game A comes out of my mouth. And I've extended it to a whole bunch of fairly tangible topics, which I'm going to run through relatively rapidly. So let's both try not to go down the rabbit hole of digressions. First, I think we both agreed that a reasonable way to present the current state, we could call the pre-Game B world, or pre-B for short, where there doesn't actually exist a whole of a functioning Game B group, not even a small one, but there's lots of things that people are working on to get ready for that first real step. And first, you called this out in 2017, finding the others, and that's starting to happen, right? Through Twitter, through Facebook, through all traveling around the country and meeting to people and telling people about Game B. So let's let that one go, because that one seems to be happening. And though, of course, we'd encourage any of our listeners who think that they would like to play Game B to reach out to these connection points we talked about earlier, the Game B group on Facebook and hashtag Game B on Twitter, and find the others. But then the next one, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this and also started applying it to your own life, is making changes in our lives to be more Game B ready. Things like building courage and optimism, integrity, honesty and good faith, escaping the matrix of status-oriented consumerism and being programmed by psychologically astute mass and social media. What are some other things in the changing one's own life that you would say fit to this pre-B world?
Well, three things pop up immediately, and I don't know if they're related. So one is that I've noticed that many people who come with a, hey, let's get going attitude have often not done a lot of work on what I would call a transparadigmatic mind. And so there's what I would call a naive assumption that the paradigm that they are very familiar with, whatever it happens to be, is the right paradigm. And what ends up happening, of course, is that then they reshape the story of Game B into something that is like their paradigm. So one of the things is to actually take quite seriously this notion of liminality, even down to the level of what I would call transparadigmatic mind, which is a real thing. Like, that is not a trivial capacity to be aware of the axiomatic assumptions that you are bringing into your sense making, and to be able to actually shift between different paradigms as the arena that you're in changes. So that's one. Two is building a capacity for orienting your choices on the basis of sensed meaningfulness. And these two things are actually very connected. So in Game A, we are very, very separated from, developmentally and socially separated from, our capacity to orient our sense making on the basis of the sense of meaningfulness. So for example, we spend more time on bullshit at work than with our kids. And so something is off. And yet we don't actually choose the thing that, if we were to spend real time on it, is the more meaningful. We rationalize and or just delude ourselves or ignore. And that has to be broken. Like, you cannot do Game B, because that's a primary piece of the capacity, is this primordial or prefigured capacity in the human body to be able to just notice and be able to be aware of what is more meaningful than other things, just to you, like what feels more meaningful, just that. And being able to be like this really concrete self-discipline to make sure you've got shit straight in order. So if you're sacrificing that, if you're either radically unaware of what is most meaningful, fix that. And then if you are noticing that your choices aren't actually in accordance with the values that you think you hold, fix that. And then notice, what is the capacity in you that actually allows you to sense what are the values that are going to orient towards meaningfulness? What are the values that you hold? What's the sense that gives you that? And what's the sense that allows you to use those values to actually notice what seem like really good choices in front of you? And you have to relearn a lot of machinery that was pounded out of you largely by both education and the economy, in being able to know in yourself what you actually care about and make choices on the basis of what is actually important to you. God, that's so insane how hard that is, because I find many, many people are actually running ideologies. which is to say that they substitute somebody else's code, somebody else's proposition for what is important in exchange for their own. So instead of listening to my own sensing of what I actually care about, I actually override myself in favor of some particular ideology that has somehow been able to impose itself on me as being more important and therefore more valuable than the values that my whole self are actually yearning for. That's a piece that has to be done.
Let me throw in a tangible. You know me. I like the tangible. To the introduction piece, I said, we need to deprogram ourselves from status-oriented consumption. So if a person thinks they need to have a fancy BMW to be who they are, and therefore they have to take a high-pressure job with a 90-minute commute so that they can afford this BMW, the result is they're not going to have the time to spend with their children or their spouse or their friends. And so they have taken this ideology, which programmed into them by psychologically astute media and advertising, and have inserted that instead of their actual really meaningful goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that happening in all kinds of interesting ways where, for example, rather than hanging out with friends and family, they go to an upwardly mobile business meeting with people that they have very little sense of actual connection with, because in the back of their mind, they don't even like the job that they've got, right? It's just, you got this huge explosion. And what's interesting about it is that there's a synergy value that shows up, because the way I'm describing it, it's kind of like freeing your mind and increasing a capacity to make more meaningful choices. But at the same time, it's also freeing your economy, because if you're not addicted to this particular vector of status consumption, you're obviously not necessarily dependent on as much of a flow of money. And this gives you a lot more actual freedom.
Exactly. And, at least to my mind, I strongly suspect that one of the roads to getting ready for Game B is to get one's financial life in order. And that doesn't mean making more money. It may well mean just spending less having your buttons pushed to make you think you need X, Y, and Z.